All right, hello and welcome to my book study. Thank you so much for being a part of it, and I hope you enjoyed the book or have started reading it or will start reading it after this first little video session. I would just like to tell you the book that we will be studying is Other People's Words, The Cycle of Low Literacy by Victoria Purcell Gates. And I read this book for another college class and I really enjoyed it, and I think it's just very applicable to elementary teachers, especially because a lot of the reading skills that are discussed in this book are very pertinent for elementary teachers, especially in such a poverty-stricken area that we live in. This is a whole other kind of poverty and a whole other kind of population, but it's similar. All right, and I will be breaking the book into 3 parts. So this is part 1. And part 1 will discuss chapters 1 through 3 and the introduction at the beginning. And if you're following along the book, that is pages 1 through 66. Alright, so the premise of the book. Gates, the entire book, this is basically her premise. This is the overarching theme that she gets across. It's about Jenny and her son Donnie. They're our main characters, and of course her herself, because she's the researcher and the teacher in the book. Alright, Jenny is a mom of 2, and she lives in an urban Appalachian community. She is living in a very poverty-stricken neighborhood, her and her whole family. And I will be discussing urban Appalachian here in just a few minutes. Alright, so I think Purcell Gates, she describes it as a low caste. Jenny and her family, they are just at the bottom of the barrel here, which is just sad in itself. But her entire family is living with basically not knowing how to read. They know a little bit, which I will also discuss here in a minute, but they do not read like you and I read. Like whenever we see words, we just know what it says. She's living her life totally different than we are. And she's living it in America, in a place like not even far from where we are right now. You know, she's not in a third world country, but she's living like she is, which is just insane to me and to this researcher who wrote the book. The author is an educator at a college in the area. They don't ever say the area, but I was doing some deductive reasoning, and I'm pretty sure it's Cincinnati. That's what I think, just from reading other books too about urban Appalachia and knowing that region. Anyways, that's my guess. But she's an educator, and she is working at the college, and they have a reading lab, and they have a really good reading program for reading teachers. And she takes it upon herself to help these 2 people, Jenny and her son Donnie, who is in 1st grade. Alright. And she wants to bring literacy into their lives. She is a reading specialist guru, and she knows the importance of reading, and she just can't believe that these people are existing without it. Alright, so that's the premise. That's what the whole book, that's the whole shebang. Alright, in a tiny little nutshell. I would first like to discuss urban Appalachians and what urban Appalachia is, because I didn't know what it was till I read this book. And it's one of my favorite topics now. So urban Appalachian, that culture stems from people who were who were from Appalachia, so from Kentucky and North Carolina and Tennessee and West Virginia and Southern Virginia, all that Appalachia-y area. And their parents moved out of the area, or their grandparents moved out of the area to find work usually. If you have read the book Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, it just sums up what urban Appalachian is, boom, in his life story. He is an urban Appalachian. So they move to places like Ohio, especially, or they go on up to Detroit, but cities with jobs, of course, is the whole thing. And so this is how it happened in this book. Jenny's recent relatives had moved there, and she was brought up there. So her family was from Kentucky, but she lived in Ohio her entire life. So these people, urban Appalachians, they never lived in Kentucky, or if they did, it was for a minute. But they're not really from there, but they feel like they are from there. They say that's where they're from. They talk with that accent. They act like that's where they're from. Their kids even start acting like that's where they're from. So Jenny, in this book, she never lived in Kentucky ever, but she'll say back home, and she'll mean Kentucky. And her son Donnie, and her other son, and her husband, that's where they all think of home as, even though they've never lived there. They live in Ohio. So that's who the urban Appalachians are, and that's where they come from. But they believe that they're still Appalachians, so they never really assimilate in this new life that they've made for themselves. And because of that, their poverty levels stay low. They don't want jobs. That's all way more discussed in the J.D. Vance book I was talking about, which is awesome also. But Jenny is a victim of that. She fell victim to that. Her parents probably had an okay job, moving there from Kentucky, but Jenny just never did. Her husband works some, but it's off and on. But this all just culminates in them living in poverty. And it also stems from Jenny, not having a very good public school experience. So there was my urban Appalachian spiel, and now I'm going to segue into Jenny's public school experience and her background in reading. Like I said, she's not from Kentucky, but she doesn't believe that she's from Ohio either. So that just gives you kind of a split life almost. You don't think that you belong somewhere. You think you should belong somewhere else, but you're never really going to wind up in Kentucky again, like they think they are, but they never really do. So Jenny, she went to school in Ohio, and she was country. So the teachers in Ohio, according to Jenny and according to the story that Gates gets from her, the teachers didn't think she was very smart because she had an accent, because she acted different, because she just was different, She was this white kid living in Ohio, but she wasn't really. She was this poor Appalachian kid living in Ohio, It's just a whole different culture. And so they didn't quite know how to reach her, and therefore she didn't learn how to read very well. And it also could have been from some learning disability or just a low intellect as well. But the teachers and the atmosphere and the culture played a role in it also. They didn't care. She says several times that she was just passed through school, passed along, and she never learned how to read. She is a functioning adult with 2 kids, and she has a husband, and she's a home, like a housewife sort of a person. And she does really good at that, but she can't read. She was passed through elementary, middle, and high school without knowing how to read because she was different, because they didn't have any hope for her. The teachers didn't believe in her. They didn't want to try. They just wanted to pass her on, which is just so sad to me. And it's just interesting that these urban Appalachians can slip through the cracks like that in a place like that. Like, you think of the poverty being with African Americans sometimes in place, like in low poverty areas of big cities like that, or Hispanics, or just other minorities. But these urban Appalachians are white people, they're not a minority. But they are, because they're not urban. They're not from Ohio. They're this whole other little subsect that just got kind of dumped there, They never assimilated. They never knew how. So they're also a minority, which kind of goes with the trend of minorities being lower achieving, especially in reading stuff. So Jenny grew up, didn't know how to read. She has a pretty good grasp on environmental print. So in the book, the author lists some of her grocery lists almost, or she'll have Jenny write down words she knows, which this comes up a little bit later. But Jenny can get to the doctor's office because she knows that sign is the doctor's office. Or she can go to the grocery store because she knows that sign's the grocery store. She knows a lot of things from being just brought up, like her parents, going with her mom places, learning things like that. So she might not be able to read the sign, but she can know how to get there. And she wouldn't be able to write down directions, but she could tell you how to get there. All right, and her son, Donnie, he is a young boy. He is in 1st grade, and I believe he winds up failing it as well. I'll have to reread that section of the book. That'll be for next time, though. But Donnie, he is about that age, and he should be learning how to read. He should be, boom, right there, reading, all right? And he's not. He knows, I believe the only sight word that he knows is the at the beginning, and he knows his name. That's it. That's all he can read. And he's a perfectly happy, smart little boy, he does all sorts of good things at home. I mean, he's a productive little kid. But again, the teachers are not reaching him like he needs to be reached. He is this little subsect of a community that they don't have any interest in learning anything about or how to communicate with the parents. It comes up several times that Donnie's teachers, they will send home letters, but Jenny can't read them. And they'll send home dates to put on a calendar, but Jenny, she can't read, so she doesn't know how to do that. It's just amazing to me, And I guess a little bit of it is Jenny saying, I can't read and I can't communicate with you this way, but who wants to do that? That's so embarrassing. So the teachers, they're letting him slip through the cracks as well. It's going downhill for him. So poor little Donnie. And that's where our researcher, Miss Gates, finds them. And that's basically what they both know. That's basically their functioning reading level, as is her husband, kind of. He knows a little bit more, but he's a mechanic, so he does not have to read every day. And she has another younger son who is not in school yet, so he doesn't know anything either. They live in a life full of stories and excitement, and they go back home to Kentucky all the time. So they live a really rich, nice life, even if they do live in a poverty-stricken area, and even if they are very poor themselves. Another thing that Jenny does a lot is she'll read the boys' stories, but she doesn't read the words. She just makes up words, and she doesn't point to the words when she reads them. Or she'll tell them stories a lot of the time. She'll just tell them. And so they just think that's how stories are. They don't think that the words mean anything. And that's a really big theme in this book, that words mean something. So next time, when we discuss our next section of the book, and that'll be chapters 4 through 6, we'll be discussing how the author wants to make words mean something and how that's so important in learning how to read, and we'll discuss some of her first steps in teaching them how to read. All right, thank you. That is part 1.